Yeah, see, perfect. I just have I only literally just recorded Zoom or downloaded Zoom very recently for something else I was doing, and I realized it literally cuts you off like halfway through a sentence sometimes, and I was like, oh, it's a disaster if you don't have premium. So I'll start the question off easy, as I said, but just your journey into bodybuilding, what first got you into it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I mean, I've kind of been involved in sort of the fitness industry now for 12 years, personal training. I started kind of training when I was 16, just the usual story, like a little bit overweight, wasn't particularly confident, found the gym, started really enjoying the gym, and then, sort of thought I'd like a career, like sort of helping people and sort of pushing that sort of side of things that found so much confidence in. So I went to University of Sunderland, actually, done sports science degree, came out with a first, and then stayed in Newcastle, actually, went over to Newcastle and started becoming, working in personal training. And at that stage, it was very much like general fitness training to look good, I suppose, and feel good. Probably more of a health side of things and than particularly a cosmetic side of things. And then as I kind of get into the fitness industry more, I realized I really liked working in you sort of body transformations. And then that led to sort of, I suppose, a more extreme sort of thought process about like what I would like to do. And then really like the actual bodybuilding side of things itself came about with like COVID coming, because obviously as a personal trainer, only personal trainer at that time, like work shut down, was like, right, I sort of lost myself a little bit with things and thought, well, I want something to get my teeth into. So I kind of set myself aside like 5 years to go down the more extreme avenue of bodybuilding. And that's really where it all started. And then from there, obviously, like then I started working online with mostly kind of competition style competitors and photo shoot competitor people as well. So it was very much like my enjoyment of the fitness industry became more about like the ins and outs and the inertias of like body composition change.
Amazing. So, um, how long have you actually been doing bodybuilding, and then how long have you been competing in bodybuilding?
Well, I would say like, I think majority of people who go to the gym are like bodybuilding to some degree. They're in there to try and change their body. So like a large portion of my really late teens to 2021 was spent doing that. But when my sort of head clicked to go, right now, I'm going to like take this and use that, like be a sport for me. That was really probably now, well, it'll be 2020, sort of mid 2020 as COVID and lockdown came about. That's when I started, just concentrating on bodybuilding and actually saying I'm going to compete and we'll try and move up through the ranks as best I can within a sort of given time frame. So really like my first competition was at the very back end of COVID, which I believe was maybe 2022. I competed and I'll talk about this later. I'm sure there's questions, but like men's physique, which is like the board shorts, sort of slimmer, more good looking kind of guys, more marketable. And that really wasn't like it sort of scratched an itch to compete, but it wasn't really like it still wasn't enough. I was like, right, well, what more can you do? Because I always wanted to go, right, how far can I take this? So then I took 18 months out, started putting weight on. Then I competed in my first bodybuilding show, took another year out, and then competed as like I suppose the open class kind of bodybuilders.
Well, there's long gaps between like how long you have to take between each category and each competition. And you actually mentioned there a few different categories. What actually are the differences between those? And how many categories would you kind of have in bodybuilding?
I mean, there's lots of categories, and I think it's like, especially now, sort of maybe 15, 20 years ago, there was maybe only like bodybuilding, women's bodybuilding. So it was like a very extreme look, I suppose, with extreme methodologies behind it. But now it's like it's much more open for a lot of people to compete and be involved in it. So from the female side of things, it depends on the federations as well, because there's multiple federations. You've got the top ones would be like two bros, which is like you become an IFBB pro. So like the Olympia stage, that's your avenue to that. But then there's PCA, which is very close to it. They offer their own pro cards. And then there's more like, suppose you've thought of the Premier League, that would be like top of the Premier League. But then there's like Championship, Division One. So you can kind of climb a ladder. But with the actual classes themselves for women, there's bikini, which is a smaller, less muscled, less conditioned look. And it kind of works its way up. So you've then got big figure, really. You get bikini, wellness, which is just big legs, big bum, smaller upper body, more girls like that kind of look. Then you've got figure, which is a bit more muscular, a bit more conditioned. Then you've got women's physique, which is a bit more muscular conditioned again. And you got female bodybuilding, if you want to go that far and take it that far. And then with the male classes, there's like men's physique, which I done initially, which is a bit like women's bikini, but it's getting to the point where it's still quite unattainable for the majority of people. Then you've got classic physique, which is like smaller than bodybuilding, probably a little bit more pleasing to the eye. And then you've got men's bodybuilding, which is the most extreme version of it completely.
Yeah, there's excuse me, sorry. I'm a cold at the moment. I'm trying not to cough in the audio. Um, um, I was actually wondering as well what the differences are in how you have to train for each of those categories. So obviously, as you said, like it's very unattainable for a lot of people to even get to the first category, which would be like the bikini or the physique. But then obviously you get to the much higher end then to the bodybuilding categories. What's the major differences in how you train and eat for those?
I mean, I think it's like there's a genetic component to it as well. There's also how much you're willing to eat and how hard you're willing to train. I know like the genetic component plays a role. So like, I mean, you could how much body weight really you're carrying. Certain structures will lend themselves better to certain classes. So like for example, if you're just a thicker, bigger girl, you're going to struggle to get into like bikini because it's very small waists. There's not a huge amount of muscle there. And I think there's a time component to it as well. Like them entry level show, like the entry level classes, like men's physique, I would call it, and bikini, just takes a little bit less time. Like a lot of it's just the time spent in the trenches doing the food, doing the training. So I think there's more of a time component to it more so than anything. The actual training methodology don't necessarily like change. It's just how much food you're willing to eat and other side of things as well, which I'm sure you'll touch on as well, how far you want to actually take that. So like, I mean, yes, like certain classes will look for certain body parts to be more developed. Like men's physique, they wear board shorts to cover their legs. They're probably not training legs very much. With bodybuilding, it's a massive part of it. So like little changes in training programming, but I would say like, on average, it looks fairly similar, the training for it.
You mentioned there, like as you said, the time that you actually put into the training varies so much and it is very time consuming. Do you find that then affects some of your relationships and different things in your outside life away from bodybuilding?
I mean, yeah, so like it's like anything you take to take the highest level that you want to do it at, like any sport, any job that you want to like really be successful in, it's going to take away time from relationships, from other things. But really, it's about what like, do you enjoy it? If you enjoy it, then it's not really a sacrifice. It's a pleasure. It's a like happy days. That's what I want to do. So with my relationships, at points they've I suppose suffered, but then I've also built new relationships with other people that are also in love with doing what they do.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned like it's the love for it. What actually about bodybuilding do you love? Like what is it that actually makes you that gives you the drive to do it? It obviously takes a lot of motivation and a lot of passion for it. So what is it about bodybuilding that you kind of fell in love with?
I think it's just the opportunity. Like it's all on you, isn't it? It's like it doesn't rely on other team members, other people really per se. It's like to me, it's like mastery, complete mastery of your body and your mind, or that's what you're trying to achieve with it. And like every day, it's an opportunity to win, get it. No matter how shit your day is, it's like, well, can you go to the gym? Can you eat your meals? Well, that's a win. So it's something that's very positive, and it kind of sets that mindset up to do that. And I think it transcends itself beyond the gym floor too, because you have that mindset. You can, don't know everybody does, like, but you can take it with you into other facets of your life as well, whether it be business or obviously for myself, I've made a career out of it as well. So like that's a massive, massive driver for me now.
Yeah, it definitely like I see a lot of like I was obviously looking at your Instagram and a lot of your clients like you do like great work with all of your clients and stuff like that. So that is actually like an amazing thing that has come out of you doing bodybuilding as well. Has there ever been a point where you've thought about giving up bodybuilding that it got like really hard, or have you always just had that passion and that love for it?
I like anything gets hard, but it's like a relationship gets hard, but it's whether you're like stay in it and it's worth staying in. So like part of bodybuilding is like part of the draw is that it is hard. That most people don't have the mindset to do. Maybe they don't want to do it, which is totally fine too. But there's obviously like points with like maybe niggling injuries, maybe like defeats, harder days that you questions your mind like why am I doing this? Like anything. But the overdriving thing is that I love it. You know what I mean? And it's brought me so much more in terms of just the body, but more so like friendships, relationships actually have been a massive bonus out the end of it.
Amazing. Yeah, like it seems that you have like a great passion for it and you like love it. It's obviously something that you'd have to love to do it because it takes so much like mentally, physically, even time and all that. Like it's actually incredible when I see like the athletes even online doing bodybuilding. I just think it's so impressive. But then when you are doing bodybuilding, obviously sometimes you have to do things to almost an extreme. Like you wouldn't any sport when you get to that how would you say, like level of doing something, you'd almost say you have to take it to like an extreme. And obviously that all comes with its positives and negatives. As I said, I do martial arts, so when you get to the extreme in martial arts, you're getting flaked in the head. Like that can't be any good for you, even though you are in peak physical fitness. Is there any like negative health effects that bodybuilding has had even on you or just in general to other people?
On me personally, yeah, of course. And then generally, I'm sure there absolutely is. Like, it's not a sport for the faint-hearted. And as you say, the higher up the levels you go, the more is required of you. The harder you push. There's obviously, within bodybuilding, there's a steroid use component to it as well, potentially not for everybody, but for some, and usually the higher up the level you go, the more that's required of you. Like from a general standpoint, like injuries, they happen. They happen in any sport. It's how you manage them and try and get back from them. For me personally, I haven't really issues I've had is like some knee issues. Really, that's been about as much as it goes, and then with it, like obviously, there's a mental component to it as well. You're trying to fight your body's urges when you're dieting to not eat, like just keep going. When I think a lot of sports, like when you're performing in most sports, you're at your peak of your physical health and your energy, you peak for that show. Where with bodybuilding, usually it's the absolute opposite. When you're at your best on stage, for the most part, like you're at your weakest, most mentally vulnerable because of what it takes to diet down to those levels of body fat.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting that you say that because that's actually what got me thinking to do this documentary in the first place. Because I was looking at it and I was like, you see these athletes and they are athletes, and they are so incredibly fit, but then you think of all the effects that comes with having to cut down to that percent body fat. Obviously, that has negative effects. Obviously, you're not staying at that body fat for a prolonged period of time, but it just gets you thinking like what goes into each sport that you do. Like obviously, again, as I said, boxing, like these people are in their peak physical fitness as well, but then obviously getting flaked in the head isn't the best thing to have done to you either. So it's all these kind of negative things that can come with everything. And you mentioned the mental aspect of it as well. Like how has that actually affected you mentally? Like the dieting, getting down to body fat, spending all this time in the gym.
Hard to say because I love it. So it's like, like so I'm in an off season now, and you're maybe putting away say 5,000 to 6,000 calories. That's a struggle because you're constantly thinking about eating. You have to think, right, what can I digest? What stays in my body? What doesn't just bloat me come out the other end? The dieting part, like I prefer because that's kind of when that's coming to the end of your the bookmark in your journey. That's what you do it for. So like I would say the motivation levels are that much higher. They're also harder because sometimes, especially as an athlete, you put your pressure on yourself to be better, to perform. So like there's a pressure that you kind of, I suppose some people welcome and some people don't. I know certainly like in the earlier years of me competing, it took a larger toll than it does now. Now with it, it's like more exciting. You've been through the process that many times. You kind of know what to expect, know how to mitigate certain factors like sleep, stress. But it's never the same. You never feel the same. Everything's always every prep's a different prep.
Yeah. I can imagine like how much goes into it. Like I don't think I'd be built for it at all. Like I was actually listening to some of your podcasts coming up to doing this interview and I was watching the one you did with Nadia, and a lot of the things that she said in that interview was really interesting, like how sometimes you just can't talk to people you want to be. You're just when you're in that like
You
fasting and like dieting stage.
incredibly focused and fixated. You kind of like a racehorse
Yeah.
putting the blinkers on. It's like
Yeah.
you don't have a huge amount of energy, so like nothing else really honestly matters to you. When you're that way focused. Now again, that's not for everybody, but I think people that are successful at it, they realize it takes that, especially towards the back end. It can't take like it shouldn't. It does for some again, but you learn that you can't give that all the time to it, or else you just won't have relationships. Do you know what I mean? You won't have other aspects of your life. There's times to put the foot in the gas, and there's time to kind of not necessarily take it off, but it's not required of you to be that in that state of mind all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just a crazy concept because it's like, yeah, trying to do that all that balance is just such mental stamina you have to do this sport. It's actually like it's really interesting to talk to people about it. I was talking to someone else about it before, they were telling me their experience, and I just find it incredibly interesting. What kind of percent body fat would you be aiming for when you're coming up to a competition?
I think that's a question like a lot of general public ask. Like, it's a bit like how big's your bench press? Don't really matter, does it? You know what I mean? Or, and I don't mean that like in a patronizing way, but like with body fat, it's not something like I'm not going right up because the judges aren't going. I wonder are they 3% body fat or 5% body fat or 8% body fat? It's like, what does it look like? Do you know what I mean? How really you're just gauging off your visuals. I mean, you can go and get body fat testing done, but the accuracy of it's a little bit, it's here or there. So like I'll honestly, I've never looked and went, that's my body fat percentage. I honestly never done it. So I couldn't even answer that, you know.
Yeah, I totally understand you. Sorry now, the cough again. And this is the worst part now about having a cold and trying to do an interview with someone is trying to find the gaps to cough. Um, but no, I was going to ask as well about mobility training because see a lot of bodybuilders. Obviously, you're really focused on the muscle building and all of that, and obviously having that muscle mass will constrict your mobility, and like your range of motion to some degree. Do you focus a lot on mobility, or
I think
just
we
like no, not
Oh,
time?
well, you should do it. I think we all get caught up in probably. It's probably, I'd say for most bodybuilders, it shouldn't be, but it's probably further down the pecking order. I know for myself personally, I've got a massage therapist I work pretty closely with, and a physiotherapist as well. You're talking massage maybe once to twice a week. And then there's some stretching, like potentially after sessions. But, I think it's not probably something that's hugely focused on, but it should be. It's usually you react to things when something comes up. Like if I have a knee issues, it's probably because of tight quads, tight hip flexors potentially. So that's when you start focusing on it. But it should be one of your main focuses. But you'll find there with training, anyways, with anybody, like if you're training through a full range of motion with control over that load, obviously your mobility is pretty good. For the most part, it's when you start running into issues, maybe you're training in like shorter ranges, using weights that you shouldn't use. That's when injuries and mobility issues tend to occur.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Actually, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was talking, as I said, to another bodybuilder before, and he said like sometimes it's just goal focus. Like you're just mobility is not the goal at the end of the day. It's going to
Yeah.
be muscle building. But I always find that really interesting because, being a personal trainer, I'm always thinking like about now what happens when you get older because that was kind of like a focus in a lot of the stuff that we were learning about is like when you get older, what happens then? And obviously mobility is a massive part of that. So I said I always ask that question to people then like, do you train mobility? Um, I think that is all the kind of bodybuilding focused questions, except for one actually. Do you find that bodybuilding helps with body image issues, or do you think it can actually make them worse because you're focused so much on how your body looks?
Good question. It's a conversation I've had with a lot of my clients. A lot of my clients at the minute now tend to be like junior bodybuilders, junior bikini, like younger people. And like I know personally for myself, like my reasons for training and my reasons I suppose for quote unquote bodybuilding have changed over the years. I know initially I got into it as a way to make myself look better, then get more confident, via that. Now like I'm sure there's a part of it still like all of us want to look good, but it's like it's definitely not like my main priority to look good now. If I'm on stage in 6 months' time, it's to bring my best and improve. And I think the more I personally focused on that side of things, then the more I've enjoyed the process of bodybuilding and been happier within myself because it's for a purpose, it's for a reason. My body is a tool at this point. It's not an image that I'm trying to present on stage, yes. And again, the closer you get to shows and stuff, you're analyzing and looking at yourself a lot because things change and then you're trying to bring your best. So I mean, I can definitely I mean, somebody that has massive body image issues going into bodybuilding, you're going to have bodybuilding issues coming out of bodybuilding. If you have foot issues going into bodybuilding, potentially you're probably going to have foot issues coming out of bodybuilding, maybe worse and magnified. But I would say like, but then again, maybe it's because I feel that I look good. My perception of myself is that I look good now. So is it that why I don't have as much body image issues now? I'm closer to achieving the goal that I'm trying to achieve. So I'd say as I say, sorry, go back to the younger clients. They're already picking themselves like I want bigger arms, I want this, I want that. It's like, well, are you doing everything you need to do? Right, cool. Then that should be enough because you're going to get what you're going to get. Do you know what I mean? So it's something I try and say is that you need to try and really concentrate on where you're positive. Yes, we can all be critical of ourselves. How can we be better? That's what we're all trying to do in any aspect. But at the same time, you also have to give yourself a little bit of praise for where you're at, what you're doing, and how you're doing your best.
You mentioned younger people coming into the sport, and that actually has me thinking about another question I had about social media. Do you think that that can play a part in these younger people coming into the sport and having these like perceptions of how their bodies should look and how they want them to look?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, social media has a lot to answer for everything, doesn't it? You know, like how we judge ourselves and what measuring stick we use to put ourselves against. Like I think, with bodybuilding there, let's talk about bodybuilding, obviously, like it's you see these crazy physiques and you expect that you can look like that. And maybe some people can, but most people can't look like the top physiques in the world. It's just not the way God intended you to look. So it's like you're always measuring yourself against the standard that's potentially something you're not going to get to, but then maybe you do. Do you know what I mean? It's like it definitely has a lot to answer for, and it's definitely why bodybuilding's become more popular. Like everything that has accessibility that we have more eyes on, more people will be drawn to do it. I get a lot of people coming in at the start that haven't done a show. Maybe they haven't been training that long. They want to be a bodybuilding show. They say they want to be a pro bodybuilder, but pro women's bikini. But the reality of that is so far from what they perceive they're at and what they have to do to get there. And it's a pretty tough learning curve sometimes for people.
Sorry, my phone is buzzing there. Sorry. That just distracted me there. But no, definitely what you're saying um actually resonates a lot because you see a lot of like social media and people showing off their bodies and everything, and you think it's more attainable than it is until you try to do it. But then that got you thinking about bodybuilding. You mentioned earlier steroids can have a part to play in this sport, and in some categories, obviously, it's a no-go, and in some categories, it's allowed. But then for when you are competing and using steroids, do you think on social media it's important to be transparent about that so that like when younger people are coming into the sport, they know like yes, this person looks really different things that these people may not have access to.
Sorry, that cut off for me
Right.
3 seconds there.
Oh, no worries, I can ask again anyway. We'll just give it a second there to come back. Right, I think we're back. Um, sorry, excuse me. I think, um, yeah, the question I was saying was we're talking about younger people coming into the sport and how social media can um affect people's image of like how far away they are from a certain goal. Like they see someone online and they think like, oh, I can get to that, but it's not always immediately attainable. Do you think then that it's important for bodybuilders that are using steroids to be transparent about that online so that younger people realize like that is how that is something that helped them get to where they are and it wasn't just from lifting weights and things like that. Because obviously, bodybuilding in itself has a lot of commitment to it, regardless of steroid use. But then obviously, the steroids can help as well. Do you think that it's important to be transparent about that online?
That's a great question, isn't it, though? Because say I say to you, say I am right, so say I'm whatever, say 17 stone now, and I put my steroid cycle up. Do you copy that? Do you know what I mean? So like, is that helpful for the person that's starting in the gym? You know what I mean? To go, right, well, he's using, I don't know, 500 milligrams of testosterone. So I need to use 500 milligrams of testosterone. Well, do you? Or I eat 5,000 calories a day. Does that mean you need to eat 5,000 calories a day to get into that shape? No, because that's a step up the ladder. So yes, it's really great being all open and honest. But I would present that with a level of caution too. So like, does every professional bodybuilder need to say I use steroids? It's probably a given. You'll probably find your own way with that one, right? But I don't think you should say I'm natural if you're enhanced. I think that's a different ball game. But like somebody putting this, there's a big thing of this, for a long time in social media where everyone put up their, this is what I'm doing, this is my cardio, my output, this is my steroid use. I don't know how helpful that is because yes, that's what they're doing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's what you should be doing. Or even if you want to take steroids, that's necessarily the route that you need to go down. Do you know what I mean? So right, like if somebody's standing there 17 stone lean, you mean unless you're completely diluted, they're probably on steroids, right? Do they need to say I'm full of gear? Do you know what I mean? It's not. I don't see it's that helpful. If somebody's standing there in great shape and they're claiming that they're natural, to me that's a far bigger problem than someone not suggesting that they might be using steroids when they're a professional bodybuilder.
Absolutely, yeah, no, I definitely agree. That's a very good point though you make about not necessarily putting on dosages and stuff because it almost encourages younger people then to want to use those same dosages to get to there.
something I'll say in my podcast is like we'll talk about steroids. People want to hear about it. It's like it's this taboo subject. And it's like, oh, it's bad. It's this. It's that. And it's courage. Of course, it's like I'm not going to tell anybody to go on here like by any means. I don't think it's the right option for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people need to delve a little bit deeper into their blood work, their health management, actually the long term effects and the long term mental effects potentially of steroid use. But at the same time, us openly discussing on the podcast how much somebody's taken, I don't think it's helpful or even necessary.
No, yeah, no, definitely I agree. It's just the topic itself actually has so much nuance to it. It's actually really interesting one because as you said, there's so much taboo about it, but like it's just part of the sport. There's categories that don't allow it. I heard anyway from, and no, again, the other fella I was talking to was saying that there's categories you go into that are natural categories, and then there's ones that you're allowed to use steroids for, and that's just part of the sport. And you obviously have to do your own research into it and what you're willing to do and not willing to do. That's up to yourself then in the end. Um, you mentioned in your podcast that you yourself have used steroids in your journey into bodybuilding. What were the benefits of that for your training?
And I mean, steroids work, in terms of like we know that like from a pharmaceutical perspective, we know for the most part what they do. Now, however, like when you're using it in super physiological doses, we probably don't know fully what they do until we examine it a little bit closer. And there's a load of people doing it. We have a lot more research on it now, but we don't you don't really know until you start doing it, and that's where most people want to maybe potentially bury their head in the sand, sorry, and not like, well, what is my blood work doing? What effect is this having on me from like my cholesterol management to liver, kidney enzymes? There's things that can happen, and not going and doing your due diligence to do your health work, like buying a vial of say, testosterone for whatever price, not in the price, but like, and then not putting £100 into blood work. What are we doing? Do you know what I mean? It's like it's just being completely irresponsible, and it'll probably not get it won't get you the best result either because you need to know what's going on inside your body as well. I think I lost track of that question there. Sorry, what was?
Oh, it doesn't matter. What you were saying was actually a very good point, though, like that steroids are not dangerous might be too
For
harsh
me,
word, but
like, what have I found in terms of my own? Well, obviously, like, I started natural, went competed at 100 around 160 pound. Now that's 5 years of training and eating a hell of a lot of food. Like, I think everybody wants to go, but there's also hard work there. It's a given. The hard work's always a given, whether you're natural or you're enhanced. The hard work's a given if you're any good at it. But the steroids work, to a degree. I was on stage last year at 205 pound, 4 years after competing at 160 pound. It's 45 pound of muscle tissue. So yes, I worked very, very hard for that, but I wouldn't have done that naturally.
does it help with like energy levels as well, or is it just muscle building it helps with?
Like, I can't say I've ever felt like when I'm not on steroids, which is it's yeah, you also come off steroids. That's also part of it. It's like I can't say I feel any worse. A lot of the time I maybe feel a little bit better, but then usually I'm a little bit lighter as well, not pushing training loads as much as well. So from an energy perspective, I think like from a general health perspective, I see a lot of males now going towards testosterone replacement therapy, and getting their physiological levels up to scratch that are maybe, over 40, their testosterone levels have dropped. So you'll notice a difference in your longevity and how you feel. But in the super physiological levels, like you don't feel any better per se. Like your sex drive's bigger. You suppose your ability to train and your ability to eat and turn over muscle is much, much improved. But aside from that, it's not like I don't go, I'm on gear or I'm not on gear. You know what I mean? It's kind of it doesn't hit like that.
Yeah, sorry, excuse me. Very convenient timing for cold is when I've got this deadline coming up and all these interviews to record. Um, I would say you mentioned coming off them again. Is that difficult to do, or are you just able to do it? Like, do you have to wean off it? Do you feel there's
So
a
I mean,
difficulty there?
while I'm competing, I would say, in essence, being honest with it, I will never fully come off like testosterone. So, for example, to give you an idea of it, like when I'm say we're prepping, maybe that prep 16 weeks, the large part of that will be ran at a super physiological dose of androgens. Then after that, a lot of people will come off fully and try and regain their own natural testosterone production. When you're using sort of exogenous testosterone, you will then shut your own testosterone production down to some degree. So then to come off that, you need to try and reboot that. But however, like if I'm going to be in a competition every year and a half, I will simply just pull down and still use exogenous testosterone, but at a physiological level. So I'll use an amount that puts me at a normal range, in which case, like the majority of the side effects which you incur from supraphysiological doses just aren't present. So like during that time, I will always have a level of testosterone because you find me a lot of natural guys that are like competing, their own natural levels of testosterone will be like rock bottom, you know. So at that point, then it's like it takes a long time to recover, even as a natural, to your own physiological levels. The aftermath of using steroids for a long time is potentially that you might always need a replacement dose of testosterone. Some people can recover absolutely fine, some people won't, and I think it's understanding that that may be something that you need to think about before you go into using them. There's also something that needs to be thought about rather than just going, I see a boy on Instagram, let's do that. Again, why I sort of said about not necessarily putting dosages and everything up as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. Does that then like harm your fertility?
Again, it has potential to. Yeah, it has potential to. And again, it's something you can test. You can look at your fertility, you can get your LH and FSH, test it as well and see where that's sitting at. And then there's certain pharmaceutical interventions which you can use to try and get them back up to running as well. I've seen plenty of, and I know plenty of bodybuilders that have had plenty of kids and people that come off steroids and not have kids. And then you hear the odd story about people that can't have kids. So it's like, there's a trade-off for everything. There's a potential trade-off for everything. Everything has an effect and a side effect.
Yeah, no, I definitely like again, it's not just bodybuilding that comes with it. I suppose like again, relating it back to my own sport, like a lot of people end up with like brain injuries afterwards doing that kind of thing. So everything kind of comes with risks, I suppose, when you're doing them and when you're in an extreme
I think there's just
end of
something
a sport.
with like, and I'm generally not, I'm nowhere near an advocate for it by any means, like, but there's a big taboo around steroid and steroid culture. Whether people think it's cheating or they're going to make you into Superman or they're going to make you some absolutely crazed, angry person that's going to tear the place up, or like what it does, it sharpens the edges of wherever you are. I would say, I think that's a good way to describe it. Wherever you are, wherever your personality traits are, it's going to just sharpen the edges a little bit.
So does it have any like an effect on your mental health that when you're taking them?
Again, it's not something I've personally have ever seen. Like as I say, like if you've got an increased libido, obviously that has a slight impact. Usually it's for a positive, but like from like in terms of like depression, etc. Like it's not something that like I see potentially as triggering it. But I not that's also not to say that it can't and it won't for some people, but it's just not something that I've personally seen or with my clients. Again, it's a bit like a lot of time the danger's in the dose. It's a bit like having a bottle of beer at the weekend or a bottle of vodka. You know, it's like that the danger is in the dose and the effects are much greater with one than the other.
Yeah, definitely. There was one other question I had to ask about steroids, and I'll move on from the topic then, or we'd be talking all day. It's actually so interesting because obviously before doing this documentary, I hadn't ever spoken to anyone about steroids or anything because I haven't been in bodybuilding or spoken to anyone in bodybuilding. How do you sorry, there's someone recording something in the next room and they're screaming. They're doing a drama over there and I can hear someone roaring. Um, how do you figure out the right amount and the right dosage you're supposed to take? Is there like someone you consult for that? Is there a measurement of some sort you do?
Consultations you can have as well, and generally, like blood work's going to tell you everything, not everything you need to know. It can tell you how much. It would probably tell you don't take any. That would probably be the right answer, in terms of like your overall health and longevity. But if people are going to do what they're going to do, they like I would always say like minimum effective dose. Like it's like anything, if you're trying to put a little bit of weight on, you're not going to jump from 2,000 calories to 4,000 calories. You're going to take a minimum effective amount of calories. It's a minimum amount effective of like training stimulus to increase muscle mass. So much like with steroid use, you want to take the minimum effective dose for the maximum results without the side effects. So like you're going to start off small and then potentially build up. The more muscle tissue you have, the longer you're in it. Again, you're probably going to need a little bit more. But again, your blood work a lot of the time will tell you, like if you're measuring your testosterone levels and your estrogen levels, and you're seeing right, you can kind of gauge it off where you need. Then also, are you getting the effect you want? Because unfortunately as well, or fortunately, whatever you want to call it, you know, more is better until it isn't. Do you know what I mean? So there's
Yeah.
side effects of these drugs. Then you're taking too much because it's not giving you a net positive; it's giving you a net negative.
Yeah, okay. So that's actually quite interesting. You said did you mention there was consultations you could do for
Consultations. People, it's a big industry, it's a big business, bodybuilding. In terms of like, and there's a lot more people than I think people realize using because visually, a lot of the time you can look at somebody and you go, oh, I think they're maybe taking stuff. But there's a lot of people that take it and they don't look like they're using steroids, as well. So it's not as visible. If we look at like even like someone like Lance Armstrong, like you wouldn't look at him and go, oh, he's using steroids, but they are. But also a lot of gym goers that maybe they don't, first of all, have their nutrition very good, their training very good, their stress management, their sleep, their recovery good. They might be using steroids and you wouldn't have a clue. So it's like, it's big business. And there's a lot of people that will consult, whether they be coaches, pharmacists, people that have worked within that industry for a long time, that have a pretty good understanding from years of experience and anecdote as well. You can go that route with it too.
Yeah, that goes to show that like people always say, "Oh, sure, they're only that big because they're taking steroids," but the steroids only work if you put in the dedication and the hard work and
That's it.
everything else.
I think that annoys a lot of bodybuilders, but at the same time, like, yeah, I don't really care what people think. It's like I'm not doing it for anybody else's validation or what I mean, a couple of likes on Instagram. Doing it for myself. So like I think that really annoys people. They're going, yeah, I don't think I'm working hard, but if you're not in it, how would you know? You know what I mean? You can't expect people to know if they're not in it or people don't talk about it.
I actually can't fathom how people don't think you have to put in hard work. Like just yeah, taking steroids and just gonna like magically put muscle on you. Like it's work, it's hard work, and it's dedication, and it's like a real passion that you'd have to do it. Like again, like not everyone is cut out for it. I don't think I'd be cut out for it at all. Like mentally, I don't have the stamina to commit to
I
something
get,
like
I'm
that.
gonna get you a show here at the end of this.
Um, oh God, more coughing. Let's see there. I have just a few more questions, and I'll wrap it up. Then I don't want to take up too much more of your day. Um, what you're obviously you mentioned that you coach a lot of people and you coach people um into bodybuilding and things like that. What percentage of your clients have the goal of bodybuilding, and then how many go on to compete?
Well, I would say now, like that kind of numbers went up quite a lot over the last few years. I suppose it's like because I've only been really actually in bodybuilding 5 years, and it just takes time to build up a client base that want it, a reputation. But now it's starting to take off. So, and initially maybe one or two, every year, every couple of years. Where now it's like in April here, there's 6 shows back to back, 6 weekends. There'll be 8 competing across them shows. There'll be some later in the year. So, probably 50 to 60% now do that. Others do photo shoots, and some are just general lifestyle health, that just looking to come in the gym and train. For sometimes it's mental clarity too. But probably around 50, let's say 50 to 60% now do that.
Wow, yeah, that's actually like a big percent of like your clients coming in to do that because I know a lot of other places wouldn't have any bodybuilders. It kind of depends on the place you go.
A lot of mine would
Do
be a lot of mine are girls as well. So it's not just guys. I would say like it's probably 50-50 split between males and females now. Where it would used to be a lot more females, but
wow,
since I get into doing like more like I got bigger, I suppose more males started to come that way as well now. But the majority of my base would have always been women.
that's really interesting. Do you think that bodybuilding is becoming more popular amongst women?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many avenues to compete, and a lot of people see their mate doing it, and then they try it, whether that's the right way or wrong way. But they, yeah, it's much more popular. It's just much more popular in general now, because there are so many classes to try compete in federations. You can go where there's a show every weekend.
Yeah, and I suppose about social media helps with that because, like, sure, I suppose before social media, like, who would you have seen being a bodybuilder? Really, I think the only example I could come up with would be like Arnold Schwarzenegger and stuff, and you'd see him and you'd be like, I'm sure I could never look like that. Whereas
Yeah.
now you see everyone on social media and it's a lot more attainable. Well, with a lot of hard work, it's more attainable. You see more people doing it. Um, is the process then of getting women into the sport a lot different from getting men prepared? Because obviously there'd be different health concerns, and maybe different steps that need to be taken.
I mean, I would say the majority, like, again, the majority, overwhelming majority of my females like are natural, because they're competing in federations that are untested, so they're not necessarily natural federations. But like for a woman to achieve a bikini physique, I would say the majority of people that train hard and eat well could have a good run at a bikini show. Again, the higher up the levels you go, the more competitive you get. There's some enhancement, but it's very, very it's really not that necessary to a point. Do you know what I mean? So it's it's still hard work. Like there's still a lot of cardio, and then you find women obviously tend to be smaller. If I'm sitting 110 kilos and a woman's 50 kilos, obviously the amount of food they need to eat is a lot less. So they're potentially a little bit hungrier. It's relative though. And then potentially their cardio, because there's less food to actually pull from, that their expenditure and their cardio needs to be that bit higher, as well. And then if
Yeah,
you're
no, definitely.
health perspective, not necessarily women steroid use, but just from a general health perspective, dieting to that level, like a meal, can, put your hormones pretty low. So a lot of women maybe will lose their menstrual cycle as well. And that's why, like, potentially it happens. And sometimes there's an understanding that it might well happen, but it's then regaining that post show when you go through these health phases, trying to make sure to get everything back up and running and functionally feeling well, a lot sooner than expected. Like with women, the psychological side of it, I think sometimes it's quite hard. For a man puts on a stone, if I put a stone on, I'm like, fuck, you're massive. Where if a girl puts, obviously we're not going to say it's relative the amount of weight, but I think with social media, with popular culture, a female putting on a bit of weight is looked upon a little bit differently than a male putting on weight.
No, definitely, yeah, there's definitely more of a stigma, not so much stigma, but there's just something about it that's perceived as more negative. Like again, like you said, yeah, like when a man puts on weight, it's like, oh, like you're massive now, like congrats. And if a woman does it, it's like, oh, like you're massive. It's
That's
not like
that's
congrats.
like pushing for it. I find a lot of the time the actual post show period is a little bit harder for the majority of people than the actual prep and the competition season itself, because there's this like huge focus and huge goal that you're working towards. Everyone's getting leaner, you're getting this internal and external validation, and then boom, it's taken away and nobody cares. And that's when you need to be doing it for the right reason, not to post a picture up and then be like, oh shit, nobody cares anymore, because people don't care. Your next week's news, you've got to do it for yourself. So that post show period is vitally important in terms of regaining your health markers, your health metrics, getting some body weight actually back on you. That's the goal at that point. It's not to try and go, I've still got abs. It's to get some body weight back on you, eating to a decent level, and having a little bit more, I suppose, quote unquote, balance within your life.
Yeah, no, definitely, because like you said, for female bodybuilders, getting that body fat percentage down will mean that they lose periods and things like that, which is something that actually another aspect that sent me towards the bodybuilding aspect is when I was doing my studies for personal training. One of the coaches actually mentioned that that happens and that when people get their body fat percentage down, they lose their menstrual cycle and stuff. And sometimes it can be permanent. And I was like, that's something that I don't think a lot of people actually talk about. I found that really interesting. Because I wouldn't have known that if he hadn't said it.
I mean, you should be able
Um,
to, if you're doing it correctly, you should be able to regain that cycle. If you do lose it, not everybody loses it, but if you do lose it, you should be able to, regain that fairly quickly. And that's what you'd want. That would be the goal. Before you start doing anything, thinking about competing, dieting again, you want to regain that. And it's much like a meal as well. Like your libido as a natural will be, even as an enhanced guy, a lot of time will just be completely crushed and in the ditches. And that can take some recovering too.
Definitely, yeah, no, I totally understandable then when you're coming down, when you're coming, when you're coming back down from competing, is that how hard is that actually? Like, do you have to do, is it like a gradual thing? Can you just go back into your normal life?
It's challenging. Like if somebody's doing a 16-week prep with me, I'll say, you're not doing a 16-week prep, it's like a 20 to 22-week prep. That back end of that is really important just because there's a huge psychological component to it as well. But like you're basically reversing out of that diet that you've been on, because like you don't want to go from doing like eating probably very little by the back end, doing a lot of cardio to then just going back to eating all the food you want, because food, everyone's so driven by food at the back end of it. It's that you need to be smart. You're still need to think about those increases that you have in order to maintain, first of all, a good body composition, and then set your off season up, because that's the improvement phase. If you go in and get fat very quickly, you need to be thinking about dieting again, and you've no room to push muscle on. So it's been, it's not
Yeah.
necessarily slow. It's get out of the ditches and then start to slowly gain over that period of time.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean is just constantly thinking and like constantly planning. It's actually it takes so much of like your mental space up like this sport. But I suppose most sports would, you're always thinking about your nutrition and everything else that goes into it. Um, just a final question or two, and then I'll I'll leave you go. I'm so sorry. It's taking up like a
That's fine.
massive portion of your day. Um, you have a decent following on Instagram, and obviously you post a lot on Instagram. How important is that for your career as a bodybuilder and as a fitness coach?
Not so much as a bodybuilder. Again, like my bodybuilding's something that I love doing. So, like whether if I have a lot of followers or not, it doesn't really matter to me. Do you know what I mean? Like as a bodybuilder, it doesn't really matter. As a coach, it's more important because obviously it's the only really avenue that I can show evidence of like my work and the quality of my work as well. So, like I think you can go down the route of chasing followers and maybe not necessarily uh doing it the way you'd want to do it or being particularly authentic with yourself. So like it's not something I really do is try, I just try and be me on it. So like with that becomes a little bit less following because you can see, you see a lot of influencers there just posting pictures of their bum all the time, no matter what they're doing, and they'll gain followers, but are they necessarily the followers that are going to buy like quality coaching from you? Probably not. Do you know what I mean? So I'm always trying to post out just quality and stuff that like appeals to me and I think would appeal to the people I want to work with. So it's helpful. It's definitely one of the main tools I'll use to garner clients, but it's not at the expense of being authentic.
Brilliant. And then you also have a podcast. Obviously, I was giving it a listen coming up to this. It's actually really, really informative and really interesting. What inspired you to start that podcast?
I just think like, I like to have open, honest conversations with people. And I think it's when you get somebody and you can get to feel comfortable and get them like speaking for an hour, you'll find out a lot about people as well. And I like the what I love about bodybuilding probably as much as anything is the community that you can build from it. When it's making those connections because there's not many people who sit down and eat chicken and rice 5 times a day, so you're a pretty niche group of people. So if you can bring those people together, they're going to have a lot of commonality, and they're going to, what can feel like quite an isolating sport at times because it's very much on you. It's like creating some sort of community. It's only a good thing. So like, and especially over here, because obviously you're Irish in Ireland, there's a lot less it's not as big, but there's a lot of great athletes, and I think having people in and speaking about it, it only helps grows the sport and helps grows the thing that we love to do. But also, you can share education and we can share stuff about like potential downsides of steroid use or training or whatever it is, because that's a platform in which you can speak pretty openly from.
Amazing. Sorry, the cough is back again. Um, Brilliant. I actually am out of questions for you. I just think that was all really interesting. And what you were saying there about like podcasts kind of helping the community come together is actually a very good point because like you said even in Ireland like bodybuilding is much more of a niche thing I would say in Ireland you don't see it as much especially not in a lot of the gyms anyway like even finding people to talk to for this documentary has been a job in and of itself.
Oh,
I can't
but
imagine I don't think yeah like bodybuilding even in the northeast actually I found is quite hard to find people doing it up here maybe if I was down south it might be easier to find more people because there'd be more people there. But
also, what I would say, like as well, when it comes to it, see when an outsider comes in, like it's not to put you an out somebody that doesn't bodybuild
yeah.
asks a bodybuilder for an interview, you always go, "Oh, here we go. This is going to be a stitch up. It's going to be something that tries to paint it in a bad picture." Do you know what I mean? And I think that's a lot of the time the problems with getting like bodybuilders to talk very openly about their lifestyle because it opens themselves up to judgment. But I'm not too. I don't
Yeah,
really
no,
care about
yeah,
that.
I definitely can because I know like a lot of people have this like negative idea of bodybuilding in their minds, but like at the end of the day, it's a sport like anything else is a sport. Like everything will come with its negatives and positives. Like again, as I said, being someone in martial arts, like sure, what I'd be doing half the time isn't healthy. Like getting hit in the head isn't a good thing either. Like you were mentioning your knee problems earlier, I've got knee problems galore, like from everything. So like everything comes with its negatives. Like not everything is going to be all sunshine and rainbows, especially on the more like extreme end of things. Like as you said, on the obviously you can do like the bikini side of things at a natural level, but then as you get up to bodybuilding, steroid use and things like that just comes with the territory. It is what it is. You just have to be careful when you're doing it, I suppose.
That's it. That's it. I mean, it's doing it correctly. It's doing it within the realms in which you're happy to push it and kind of understand actually what you want from the sport. Because otherwise,
Mm.
if you don't know what you want from anything, it'll chew you up and spit you out. So it's
Yeah,
like it's very much just realizing like what do I want to get from this? What do I feel good doing and what sits well with me? And then go at it. Give it some.
yeah, no, exactly. This has been like a great conversation, really. I've gotten amazing information out of it. I was wondering actually, do you happen to have contact with other people who might be willing to talk to me, even in Sunderland or in the Northeast would be